Before he was Captain Paulie, he was just a kid in Newark who grew up believing stories about toughness. He didn't have a strong father figure. What he had were neighborhood men with money, silk shirts, and quiet authority. He learned early that volume equals presence. If you're loud enough, people notice you. And if they notice you, they hesitate. In his world, hesitation keeps you alive. As a teenager, he wasn't running rackets, he was running errands, parking cars, standing lookout, delivering envelopes without asking what was inside. That's how you earn oxygen in that world. He attached himself to older soldiers connected to the Demio family structure. He didn't dream of being boss. He dreamed of belonging. The uniform wasn't a suit. It was approval. If you respect the structure, hit like. If you understand the game, subscribe. And in the comments, tell me who moves smarter than Paulie or who didn't. When he first connected with Tony Soprano's crew, Tony wasn't boss yet. Tony was a rising captain under Junior Soprano's authority. Paulie gravitated toward Tony because Tony carried both intelligence and volatility. That combination felt like protection. Paulie didn't want to outshine him. He wanted to attach himself to the man who would eventually control the room. But even as a soldier, insecurity never left him. He watched how Tony favored certain people, especially younger earners like Christopher Moltisanti. That bothered him. Paulie had put in decades. Christopher had bloodline access. In that world, lineage moves faster than loyalty. And Paulie felt that quietly. He would never say it outright, but he measured where he stood constantly. When Tony rose to boss, Paulie rose with him. Not because he was the smartest choice, but because he was the safest. Promoting Paulie to capo kept a loyal soldier close and rewarded years of obedience. Now men reported to him. He distributed envelopes instead of carrying them. On paper, it was elevation. In reality, it was exposure. As a captain, Paulie had to prove he could generate, not just intimidate. That's where cracks started to show. He maintained rackets, construction ties, sports betting, protection routes, but expansion wasn't his strength. He preserved territory rather than grew it. In a family that measured worth in weekly numbers, preservation can look like stagnation. And stagnation invites scrutiny. What kept him safe wasn't profit, it was predictability. Tony never had to guess where Paulie stood, at least not openly. Even when Paulie felt slighted, he stayed inside the line. In that world, the boss fears ambition more than incompetence. Paulie understood that instinctively. He wasn't trying to replace Tony, he was trying to outlast everyone else. Still, his loyalty wasn't pure, it was anxious. When he felt underappreciated, he drifted toward Johnny Sack in New York, testing how valued he really was. Not betrayal, but insecurity leaking sideways. He needed reassurance that he mattered beyond Tony's shadow. That moment revealed something important. Paulie didn't crave power. He craved validation, and validation is dangerous currency. That flirtation with New York didn't make him a traitor, it made him exposed. Once you test loyalty, even quietly, you never fully regain innocence. Tony sensed it. The trust never felt the same again. Paulie survived that season not because he was clean, but because he wasn't essential enough to eliminate. Sometimes mediocrity is camouflage. As the years wore on, younger men burned bright and burned out. Christopher spiraled. Others flipped. Some disappeared. Paulie stayed. He adapted to new politics, new enemies, new pressures. He didn't evolve. He endured. His greatest skill wasn't earning. It wasn't strategy. It was elasticity. Bend just enough to survive the shift. Never snap. Never stand tall enough to be targeted. Age changed the math. The younger soldiers looked at him the way he once looked at older men, as relics of a fading era. The rackets were shrinking. The violence was louder. The profits thinner. Paulie sensed it. But instead of chasing relevance, he doubled down on routine. Same routes, same rituals. In chaos, routine feels like control. Then came the quiet realization he was one of the last originals still standing. The men who came up beside him were gone, dead, imprisoned, or erased. Paulie wasn't feared like the boss, wasn't respected like a strategist, but he was present. Still collecting, still nodding at meetings. In that world, longevity becomes its own rank. When Tony offered him bigger responsibility late in the game, Paulie hesitated. Not out of weakness, but instinct. Promotion at that stage didn't look like opportunity. It looked like exposure. The higher you rise, the clearer you are in the crosshairs. He had survived decades by staying slightly beneath the spotlight. Why step into it now? That hesitation said everything. Younger Paulie would have chased rank for validation. Older Paulie understood the cost. He had seen captains disappear, bosses crumble, alliances flip overnight. Power wasn't security, it was volatility. By the end, he wasn't climbing, he was calculating. Survival had replaced ambition. And in that world, surviving long enough becomes its own quiet victory. In the end, Paulie never became boss. He never controlled the room the way Tony did, but he outlasted storms that swallowed louder men. He stayed inside the structure without trying to dominate it. That was his lane, not visionary, not revolutionary, just durable. In a violent hierarchy, durability is rare, and rare things tend to survive longer than legends. But durability has a cost. By the final stretch, Paulie wasn't surrounded by peers, he was surrounded by ghosts. Every laugh at a table echoed differently when half the seats were empty. Survival isolates. The very thing that kept him alive slowly removed everyone he once measured himself against. He didn't win the game. He simply remained in it. What makes Paulie fascinating isn't dominance. It's discipline. He never confused visibility with strength. He barked, he postured, he performed, but he rarely crossed the invisible line that gets men erased. He understood something primal. The boss fears challengers, not loyal background noise. So he made himself loud, but never threatening. That balance kept him breathing. In meetings, he echoed Tony more than he challenged him. Not because he lacked opinions, but because alignment is armor. Public loyalty buys private protection. He learned that early. Disagree in whispers, support in daylight. That pattern made him predictable. And in organized power structures, predictability is currency. It lowers suspicion. Suspicion is what gets men buried. By the final chapter of his story, Paulie wasn't climbing, competing, or proving. He was maintaining position. Same routines. His strategy was simple. Don't be the sharpest knife in the drawer. Just don't be the one that gets thrown away. He also understood optics. Laugh at the boss's jokes. Volunteer for small visible tasks. Stay engaged without appearing restless. In a hierarchy built on ego, you survive by managing perception. Paulie mastered that subtle dance. He was emotional, yes, but never revolutionary. That distinction mattered. Emotional men can be tolerated. Revolutionary ones cannot. Even his superstitions played a role. The rituals, the omens, the fear of curses, they weren't just quirks. They were control mechanisms. In a world where violence arrives without warning, believing in signs gives you a sense of agency. Paulie didn't trust fate. He negotiated with it. And that mindset kept him cautious when others grew careless. Money for Paulie wasn't about expansion. It was about insulation, enough to feel secure, enough to avoid desperation. Desperate men take risks. He avoided desperation at all costs. He didn't build empires, he built buffers, small but steady. In organized crime, the loudest earners draw envy. Paulie preferred moderate earnings and minimal spotlight. When conflict erupted between New Jersey and New York, Paulie didn't posture like a warrior. Bad for longevity. There were moments Tony questioned him, subtle glances. But here's the key. He didn't react explosively. He absorbed it. Paulie swallowed pride to preserve position. Pride is loud. Survival is quiet. He chose quiet every time. As the organization thinned out, Paulie's role became less about growth and more about continuity. He was institutional memory. He knew who used to run what, who owed whom. Quiet archives live longer than loud accusations. By the time the dust settled, Paulie wasn't the most powerful man in the room. He was the last familiar one, but expected. There's a lesson in his arc. Paulie never mistook rank for safety. He watched captains get ambitious and disappear. He watched protégés get favored and implode. He understood something simple. In a vertical power structure, upward mobility increases visibility, and visibility attracts threat. So he climbed just enough, then he stopped. So that restraint defined his survival. Quieter moments, you can sense he knew he wasn't built for the throne. Leadership at the top demands emotional insulation and strategic patience. Paulie was emotional and reactive. He thrived under structure, not above it. That self-awareness, whether conscious or instinctive, kept him from chasing something that would have destroyed him. By the end of his journey, Paulie represented the old code more than the new era. Rituals, hierarchy, respect. The world around him modernized, fractured, thinned out. He didn't evolve with it, he endured it. And endurance in that life is rare. Not glorious, not celebrated, but rare. F. Tony was ambition and Christopher was volatility. Paulie was inertia. He moved when pushed. He enforced when told. He adapted when necessary, but he rarely initiated change. That sounds like weakness, until you measure lifespan. In violent hierarchies, the initiators draw heat. The steady ones absorb it and remain. There's irony in his arc. The loudest man in the room ended up being one of the quietest threats. He talked big, gestured big, reacted big, but strategically he stayed small. Small enough to avoid assassination lists, small enough to avoid suspicion. Big personalities get remembered. Small strategic footprints get protected by default. He feared irrelevance more than death. That's why he performed so loudly. The jokes, the stories, the visible enforcement, it was branding. If people talk about you, you exist. But he was careful never to let the brand outgrow his actual power. Performance without overreach, that was the formula. When Tony's world began tightening, indictments, betrayals, disappearing allies, Paulie didn't offer bold strategy. He offered presence. Show up, sit down, agree, execute. In chaotic seasons, simplicity wins. He never tried to solve the storm. He just stayed inside the boat and avoided rocking it. The final version of Paulie wasn't hungry. He was cautious. He hesitated before taking on new responsibility. He questioned whether bigger territory meant bigger targets. That hesitation wasn't weakness. It was pattern recognition. He chose stability over expansion. By then, survival had become muscle memory. Don't argue publicly, don't chase headlines, don't make yourself indispensable. Indispensable men become threats. Replaceable men become background, and background lasts. He understood the architecture of power better than he understood business. Stay slightly beneath the ceiling, and the ceiling won't collapse on you. In the end, Paulie wasn't feared across states. He wasn't building alliances in other cities. He wasn't rewriting the rules. He was local, grounded, embedded. That limitation protected him. Expansion creates enemies you can't see. Staying regional keeps the battlefield familiar. He chose familiarity over glory. Look closely and you'll see the trade-off. He survived, but he never transcended. He held rank, but never reshaped the structure. He maintained income, but never multiplied influence. Some would call that small thinking. Others would call it disciplined restraint. In that world, restraint is rarer than ambition. So when you map his journey from errand kid to aging captain, the pattern is clear. Attach to power early. Echo leadership publicly. Expand cautiously. Never challenge upward. Never burn downward. Maintain presence. Avoid spectacle. His arc isn't about conquest. It's about calibration. Paulie Gualtieri didn't win the game. He didn't dominate it. He endured it. In a world that chews through bold men and buries reckless ones, endurance becomes a quiet crown. Not glamorous, not cinematic, but real. His story isn't about rising to the top. It's about knowing exactly how high you can rise and stopping there. If this breakdown made sense to you, the full framework is linked below. Read it when you're ready. Like the video if you value strategy over noise. Subscribe if you want more analyses on power, loyalty, and survival. And tell me in the comments, who actually played the long game better than Paulie?